Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, we're going to talk about Mexican entertainment, or rather specifically Camp Mexican entertainment, because that's what I'm more familiar with. Previously, I was talking about cartoons, and I started talking about Guillermo del Toro, which Claudia tried to teach me how to pronounce that name correctly, but mostly I just got more and more dramatic with the pronunciation instead of specifically learning it correctly. So I don't know if that's accurate, but I know I can get more dramatic. Guillermo del Toro. And it's more fun anyway to mispronounce, at least, even if it's not correct. But yeah, somebody pointed out, that I got it wrong. It actually wasn't Guillermo del Toro who did the Book of Life, or Mucha Lucha, or El Tigre, or anything like that. It was another guy named Jorge Gutierrez. I think this is right ahead of me. Yes, Jorge Gutierrez. That was the guy that actually did all those cartoons, and he's the one who's responsible for all this kind of fun Mexican entertainment stuff that's been in cartoons lately. And I kind of like the guy. I sort of like the stuff that he's done. Mucha Lucha was fun, and I can't recall exactly when I started getting into the whole Mexican wrestler thing, but I know that I really like when we were in high school. We used to do the Berlin campaign, and one of our theme gangs was the Mexican wrestler gang, which we thought was a lot of fun, because just the idea of like people doing drive-by wrestling moves, like like this gang pulls up to you in like an old car, and then a guy jumps out and does like a suplex on you or whatever, hits you with a chair or some other like crazy wrestling stunt, was really amusing to us. We really enjoyed that. So just kind of the idea, like the color and the flair and the style of like the Mexican wrestling is cool, because they're all like superheroes. Each and every one of them has their own colors and their own signature moves and their own things that they do. And this was the basis, and really actually a very good idea for a TV show for Mucha Lucha, which it took this kind of concept of everyone is like a superhero basically, but they're still they're more grounded. Like they don't really have like superpowers. They're just all like physically very fit and capable of doing these amazing feats of like human strength and agility. So it was kind of an interesting thing, like the idea of there being like this luchador school that all these different kids go to. It was kind of like the almost like the magical girl trope, where you go to school and all the it's like dealing with your magical stuff, or like a Harry Potter universe kind of thing, I suppose. Harry Potter's probably more apt. The magical girl is usually like only the magical girl knows she's a magical girl. Yeah, it's like the Harry Potter universe, I guess, but just with like Mexican wrestlers. And I think it's interesting though the way that they blend, the way that he blends sort of the American stuff with the Mexican stuff. Like you don't really get this sort of like it's Mexico. I mean, like it's there, but it's kind of I guess what you might call sort of a Tex-Mex kind of thing. It's just sort of like a blend of the two. And this is probably I don't know if he does this specifically because it jives better in America, or if this is like a thing that the producers wanted. But it's interesting because that sort of blending of the two cultures makes it weird, and you get some more jokes and kind of a little bit more tongue-in-cheek kind of stuff if you're willing to play with it and have fun. But yes, I think that when I first started to really get into Mexican wrestling, though, it wasn't actually with the Berlin campaign. Like, it was fun then, and I liked it, and I liked the idea of, like, Mexican wrestlers. And we actually had that be a recurring theme in a couple of our games. Because I remember, like, Alan had access to this sort of Mexican wrestler maker sort of thing. And so he would, like, design these characters, and he would show us, like, here's this mask, and here's this guy, and here's this thing. And so he'd come to the role-playing games, and he would have, like, pictures all printed out. But in my college town, when I was going to college, they used to do this thing called Cinema con Queso. And this was actually a lot of fun, where down at the movie theater, they had this little college movie theater that showed some normal films, but they also did this thing where they would do this double feature kind of thing, like this A and B movie, where they would show old Mexican films, and there were a variety of different films, but a lot of them were Mexican wrestler films, because they were some of the cheesiest things that they could find, and they thought it was a lot of fun. And it got to be actually a really big deal. Like there was a Mexican ambassador who was out in Kansas. And he came out to one of those things, and it was kind of funny. He got up there and he gave a speech, and he talked about sort of like the history of Mexican wrestling, and then they raffled off masks, which I thought was cool. And I went to that thing recurringly, like whenever they did it, I tried to keep an eye on it, and I would go up there, and like they would sell you beer. It was one of those things you could drink in the theater. So you'd drink beer, and you'd have a good time, and you shout at the screen, you'd be like, "Oh, El Santo," like So El Santo was the one who was the most popular. There were other Mexican wrestlers that appeared in these films, but El Santo was the big guy who kept showing up. And those movies, they're funny. Like, I really like the El Santo movies, especially watching it in, like, a theater full of people, because everyone, like, a theater full of drunk people, because they're not, like, they can get a little slow at times. Like, their pacing's not perfect, and the plot's, genuinely ridiculous. But I remember being, like, actually gripped. Like, there's a point in one of the movies where somebody actually pins down El Santo, and they start to undo his mask, and I was getting genuinely upset. Like, I was so invested in El Santo as this, like, superhero who couldn't be defeated, that I was actually getting upset watching him, like, be demasked in a bout. And I guess what they do is they wear, like, a mask under their mask, so they took off El Santo's mask, and I was just like, oh my god. And of course, the person who demasked him was like, I don't know, it was like a vampire or something, some super powerful entity that had like some excuse for being able to beat El Santo. He was also not playing fair. Like, El Santo was playing by the rules of wrestling, and the villain, who of course being the heel, was cheating. So, it was a totally unfair win. El Santo should have won that thing. But yeah, no, I just got really into it. Like, I remember they hired a mariachi band to play at the intermission for that once, and it was just like a lot of fun. Like, it was really cool. And yes, so it got me into El Santo, and the guy's actually kind of a legend. Like, if you follow along, eventually he does actually take his mask off in public. Like, he went on a talk show, and he was like, yes, I am El Santo, and he took his mask off, and the following day he passed away. And it's almost kind of legendary. It's sort of it's really interesting that he did that. What I suspect happened is that he was probably terminally ill. And if you're not familiar, when somebody's terminally ill, actually what you'll do is you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, I can make you comfortable. And what that means is that they'll put you on a morphine titration, and they'll gradually turn it up, is what they do. So you get a little bit more morphine until you fall asleep, and then while you're asleep, they turn the morphine up enough, and it shuts down your brainstem, so your body ceases all living functions, and that's how people pass away in a hospital. So what I suspect might have happened, not to ruin the legend of this whole thing, but what I suspect happened is probably the doctors told El Santo that there was nothing they could do, and they could just make him comfortable, like he was probably terminally ill, and he said, okay, well, I've got one more thing I have to do. And so he held out until he could go on this talk show, and he removed his mask for the people, and he said, this is me, this is the real El Santo. And then he went back to the doctor, and he agreed to let them make him comfortable, and he moved on. Which is almost really, if you think about it, if you suspect it from that angle, is almost more sad and more poignant. Like, the idea that the guy was an entertainer till the very end, till his very last day. Like, he got up there and he was like, he was El Santo to his last moment, and then he finally did the reveal and then passed away. And there's really no better way to have done that, I suppose. But it's kind of like, I don't know, the whole culture of the Mexican wrestling is actually really cool when you get into it. Like, the idea that, like, you never drop character. Like, you are the Mexican wrestler. Like, you are like this hero. You are like this person that you've created, this persona, and it's your identity. It's just really fascinating, and it is a really good concept to make a show out of, especially a kids show, because those things like El Santo, he was always about saving the day and doing the right thing and helping people and things like that. And some of the movies, I think, like, they became very self-aware, because some of the movies were just like straight like El Santo's the hero, hello El Santo, and he would just show up, and it was just like completely like weird. And if you didn't know that El Santo was in the movie, like, he might have just showed up by surprise. Like, I think MST3K did a version. They didn't actually call him El Santo. They didn't call him the Saint. In the American translations, they often called him Samson. And so MST3K did a thing on El Santo where it was like Samson versus the vampire women. And there wasn't any warning that El Santo was going to show up. So they're like, oh, I've got a friend who can help us with the vampire problem. And it's just El Santo. And he shows up in like this sequin cape and like this bright silver mask. And he's just like, hello. And the MST3K guys were like, oh, hello. Like, I'm a little overdressed. I didn't, I feel like I'm making a scene. Like, he didn't have a shirt on or anything else like that. Like, you're just not expecting El Santo to show up in a vampire movie. But there he is. And so anyway, I think they figured out at some point that this was actually a little bit funny. And so, like, there was one of them that was like El Santo versus the Mummy, I think it was. where there's a bunch of like mummified Mexican wrestlers that come back to life, and some other Mexican wrestlers are actually the stars of the film, but El Santo shows up at the end with a flamethrower. And it was pretty amazing. Like, he just shows up, like, he gets out of the car and he like wrestles the mummies for a while, and then, like, you know, it doesn't go over so well, so he like turns to the other Mexican wrestlers and he's like, I've got some flamethrowers in my car, go and get those. Like, he's just like driving around with these flamethrowers, and so they just come back with flamethrowers and they just light the mummies on fire, and that's it. Like, that was how they defeated him. So it was pretty great. Like, there's just this sort of weird tongue-in-cheek kind of stuff. There was also some funny innuendo with like they were implying that El Santo was unusually close to his like he had a publicist or something like that, or a manager. I think it was his manager. I can't recall exactly, but he just drove around in this hot rod, and I just remember him like having his arm like you know, on the back of the car, and it was like real casual, but it also kind of looked like one of the, I don't know. Like I said, I think they started to have fun with the films at the end, and so yeah, so it got to be fun. And when you started to get to know like El Santo, like at first it was sort of like, oh, how funny, but then eventually, like, he grows on you and he becomes endeared to you, and like when he comes on screen, like, the cheers became genuine. Like, you could tell who the regulars were coming to these things, because, like, you know, El Santo would get on screen and they would just go wild. They'd be like, oh, it's El Santo, yeah, woo, and you know, they'd be all excited. So yes. There were other ones too, not necessarily about Mexican wrestlers, but one thing that I've noticed is that you get this sort of like, there's like mariachi bullfighting and Mexican wrestling, and I noticed that you actually get a lot of that with the Jorge Gutierrez stuff. Is like Mucha Lucha was all about Mexican wrestling, and of course that has a lot of potential. You can do a lot of things with that. But then El Tigre was about superheroes, like actual superheroes. Like he kind of went all the way. He was like, all right, not Mexican wrestlers, but actual like legitimate superheroes. But the dad still wore like the Mexican wrestler mask, for example. His dad was still essentially a Mexican wrestler, and Tigre was running around in his mask too. Of course, he was El Tigre, but it was sort of like an offshoot. It was just like the logical, like, you know, Mexican wrestlers basically are superheroes, so here's another thing, and it's kind of about Mexican wrestlers, but actually they're really super. They have all these powers and these things that they do, which is still kind of a cool way to go with the whole concept, if you want to go that way. I think El Tigre didn't do as well. It wound up relegated to the Nicktoons network, and I don't know specifically why it went badly. Like, in my opinion, it wasn't worse, or why it didn't like do really well. I don't think that it was specifically worse than some of the other things that were on TV at the time. I mean, like, maybe it was... There were a lot of Browns in the show. I mean, like, it was kind of trying to create this sort of, you know, like, rustic, like, we're in the, you know, the bad parts of Mexico type of thing. So maybe the style didn't work as well. Maybe it wasn't appealing to kids. I don't know what it was. But in any case, though, yeah, you still got that kind of like musical thing, and you see this again a lot in the Jorge Gutierrez. Like the girl who was running around with El Tigre, the female lead was she was like a guitar player. She wanted to be in a band, and this was like this thing that she wanted to do. And then of course you get in the Book of Life, and the entire thing is about the main character wants to play like guitar. And he wants to be like he hangs out with these mariachi guys, you know, and they're kind of like clowns, and they're fun, and they're having a good time. And it's a much happier life. And then of course he's like, his other thing that he could do is he could be a bullfighter. And you know, so it's very like I say, it's one of those thing, like, it's just like this very like, oh, this is a very Mexican kind of thing. And it makes sense though if you get really into the sort of Camp Mexican culture, or those sort of Camp Mexican films. Like, if that's what you were inspired by, like, I can see why that would be kind of the core things that you keep coming back to, because a lot of these films that we would watch at the Cinema Con Queso, it was all kind of revolved around those sorts of things, because it's sort of like, you know, music, and like the musicians always got the girls. That was the rule with the mariachi guys. Like, I remember one of the more memorable films that we watched was one where this musician had to battle a bunch of aliens to save this girl that he met, and it was actually pretty great. Like, it was sort of like with those old-timey films. It was a little bit like Bugs Bunny, I guess is a good way to put it. It's like you had this guy, and he was like a musician, and he really didn't have any like special magical powers, but he was just like really smart. And so, or he was, I don't know if he was like even really exceptionally smart. He was just kind of clever. And so, like, these aliens kept coming for him, and they were, like, super strong, or they had, like, telekinetic powers, or this and that. And this guy just kept, like, finding little ways to, like, outsmart them and just barely squeak by, and, like, and, like, just ran off to the next challenge. And, like, everything was kind of about that. Like, he never really overestimated himself. He never bit off more than he could chew. Or if he did, he always, like, immediately bailed to, like, plan B, you know, which was retreat, escape. And then he would come back, and he was persistent, though. Like, that was the thing that got to be really endearing throughout the movie, was that he kept getting, like, he would get in these situations of defeat where he's like, nope, can't do this, and he would bail on it, but then he would immediately loop back around and come back and be like, you know, I can't go, like, I haven't got the girl back, I gotta come back, and, you know, so he would just keep doing this, like, he would just, like, oh, here we go, approach from this angle, nope, that didn't work, and he would just, like, go run off and go to, so yes, but this musician guy, and they had him do the musical thing a fair number of times throughout the movie, you know, because it was, like, he could tell a story with that, it was fun, people like music, it's good for entertainment. So, you know, he would sing the songs, and that was how he won the heart of the girl, was he sang her this beautiful love song, and she's like, oh, that was so lovely, like, you're so creative, and he'd be like, oh, thanks. I guess actually that was really the thing, you could say, he's maybe not clever, but he was creative, and he kept coming up with creative ways to escape from the villains. And if you think about it, that's kind of you know, it's a little bit challenging to write, coming up with creative ways to always get around villains that are better than you in every way. You know, like, you're never really superior to them. You just come up with, like, really goofy, unexpected methods to save the day. So yes, that sort of like, I'm a musician, you know, like, I play these songs and I do this whole thing. Like, if you think about the Book of Life, like, spoilers if you haven't seen it, but in the Book of Life, there's this great big bullfight, and the way that he gets out of it is he plays a song, basically. And, you know, if you don't write into that, there's not really a lot of other ways that you could, like, he has to fight 1,000 bulls, and he pacifies them with song, and so if you think about it, there's not really a lot of other ways that you could get into it. It's not quite that same idea of, like, alright, I'm a creative person, and I find creative ways to solve my problems. I mean, unfortunately, you didn't get that kind of fun and chicanery out of it. But you know, he still used his music to woo the girl, and the romance subplot is a big deal in a lot of films. So, you know, it's important. It was important. Yes. So, yeah, I think they're coming up with another thing. It's like Book of Life to Electric Boogaloo. This time, it's by Pixar. Or something like that. It's essentially, it's a little bit weird. It's like you're seeing very similar characters, and you're getting into this, like, Claudia was kind of joking, and she was just like, yeah, she goes, every time I see some Mexican thing going on, like, they always have to do the Day of the Dead, Dios los Muertos, they always have to do that, and they, you know, like, it's always got to be, like, a mariachi singer, or somebody's got to play guitar, and, like, we were just talking about this, we were staying awake at night, because, like I've mentioned before, Claudia's family is actually Mexican. She comes from kind of a more, her family comes from a more rural area of Mexico, I think, so she grew up in the States, so every now and then, like I bring up things, I'm like, did you know El Santo? And she's like, no, I don't know El Santo, so I showed her El Santo, but she didn't get into El Santo, so unfortunately, Mexican wrestling, not for her. I don't know if she likes some of the other things, but they haven't done a Cinema con Queso in a little while, so I don't know if they, like, I don't know how hard it is to find good campy films for that sort of thing, to get a whole bunch of people in, especially for a double feature, because you got to do at least 2 films. But, yes, she didn't know El Santo. She I don't know. Whenever I hope that she knows some really silly Mexican thing, she often doesn't know it. But she does know some famous things. I remember I think we got talking about this because she was talking about a famous Mexican singer that came over and got really popular, and she showed me one of the songs, and I can't remember what it was, but it was something like I recognized it right away. I was like, oh, I know that one, and it wasn't like it wasn't like Ricky Ricardo or anything like that or anything. Shoot, it was someone who was like legitimately famous, and I think she was shot to death. Is what it was. It was somebody who was like legitimately really big, and she was like really pretty, and I don't know. Every time Claudia asks me though, like if I know a Mexican singer, I tell her Shakira because I always think of that, and she's always like it's always kind of worth a laugh because she's like Shakira's not Mexican. I don't know if she actually is now that I think about it. I just know that there was that thing that was My Hips Don't Lie where she had the horn, and I think like I don't even remember it very clearly, but I just remember the horn. And like I associate horns with it's a very Mexican kind of thing, and so like I was just like yeah Shakira, and she's like no. I also kind of do that with her. She was watching some soap opera thing the other day, and it's like it's being told from the perspective of like a Latin lover, and like there's one guy in it who's Mexican, and I remember just like lying there on the couch, and I was just like guessing randomly like who was Mexican. And I was like, is that guy Mexican? And she's like, no, he's white. And I was like, yeah, but I mean, like, there's white people in Mexico. And I just kept doing that with, like, every single character. I was like, is that guy Mexican? Is that guy Mexican? And come to think of it, because I did that, I'm still not sure who actually was supposed to be Mexican. But, you know, whatever. Looking here at pictures of Guillermo del Toro, I feel justified. You know, it doesn't look very stereotypically like what you'd think of as like as a Mexican guy. This is one of these things too, like when you start to look at countries that are very large, you find that there's like regional appearances and people kind of like move in there and all that. So you find like it is actually legitimate to be like, yeah, this person's from Mexico. And in my mind, the first thing I think is that like, oh, it's a trick. Because you know, like you think Mexican and you want to immediately go with like, you know, dark skin, like dark hair, whatever. But I'm sure that there are people who are like born and raised in Mexico who are like, you know, light-skinned blonde guys or whatever, and that you would be fooled. You would be fooled, and so that's what I go for. I think I learned this first. I used to watch a lot of Bollywood, and you find that there's like, you know, India is a huge country, and there's all kinds of different regional appearances, and so some people are like really light-skinned, and you know, some people are kind of more what you might think of as like what you see is like a stereotypical Indian, or what you might have seen. You know, we get away from that more and more these days, I think, in media, so you don't see that quite as often. But yes, I don't know. It's fun. It's fun to be to be a wise ass about that sort of thing. Like, yeah, one of these guys is Mexican. Oh, is it that person? No, that's blonde. That person's blonde. Could still be Mexican. I don't know. But that guy. Yes. So anyway, yeah, Mexican camp, Mexican silliness. Guillermo del Toro was the producer, not actually the director for all those shows. That was, like I say, Jorge Gutierrez. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I enjoy that kind of thing. I think it's a really fun kind of entertainment that I really like. And you know, I don't know. I guess I can't say anything more than that, but just that I really enjoy it. And I suppose that'll be it for today. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.